Welcome back, everyone, to Beyond the Known.
Great to be back.
So in our last deep dive, we really went down the rabbit hole with history's greatest hoaxes, didn't we?
We certainly did. It was fascinating looking at how these deceptions actually worked.
Yeah, from the kind of lighthearted stuff, the
Yeah.
left-handed Whopper, the BBC spaghetti tree, which still gets me.
Oh, absolutely. Classic.
Right up to the more serious ones, Balloon Boy, the Cardiff Giant, those Cottingley Fairies photos.
The Taziday Tribe, the Hitler Diaries, Piltdown Man. Quite a list.
Don't forget the Great Moon Hoax and the War of the Worlds broadcast causing real panic.
Right. And we kept seeing those themes, people wanting to believe, trust in perceived authority, and just really clever deception.
It really makes you think about why we fall for things.
Mm-hmm. The psychology behind it is just endlessly interesting, tapping into those hopes or fears.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us perfectly into today's topic. We're staying in that zone where reality gets, well, a bit fuzzy.
Okay.
We're diving into the most convincing time travel stories.
Time travel. A definite crowd pleaser.
Feels like a natural next step, right? Another look at stories that just grab your imagination and make you wonder, what if?
Absolutely. I mean, time travel is everywhere, isn't it? From, theoretical physics debates right down to urban legends you hear online. It just captures something.
It really does.
Yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive, based on the research we've done, is to explore some of these really compelling stories. What makes them stick? Why do they feel so convincing, even when maybe they shouldn't?
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Okay, let's kick things off in Kyiv, Ukraine. The year is 2006, April.
Right, the Sergei Ponomarenko case. This one always pops up.
It does. So picture this. A man suddenly appears on a street. He's wearing this really outdated Soviet uniform, got an old camera.
And he starts asking people for directions, right? But to places that, well, they don't exist anymore, or the names have changed.
Exactly. And then he asks the kicker, what year is it? He thinks it's 1958.
Just instantly strange. You definitely notice someone like that.
For sure. He says his name is Sergei Ponomarenko. He even has an ID card, Soviet issued, says he was born in 1932.
But the people who saw him said he looked, maybe 30 tops?
Right. That discrepancy alone is intriguing. It's specific.
So what was his story? How did he supposedly get there?
Well, according to him, he was just out for a walk back in 58 in Kyiv with his fiancée, Valentina Kurish.
Okay.
They see this weird, bill-shaped thing in the sky, like a UFO. He grabs his camera and takes a picture.
And bam, he's in 2006.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Just transported. Same spot, different time. That's his claim.
Okay, so the authorities get involved, obviously.
Yeah.
And they're probably thinking, well, not time travel.
Not exactly, no. They were pretty skeptical, as you'd expect. They ended up sending him for a psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Kuchikov, I think was the name. Though some sources say Kudrov or Koff.
Right. The name seems a bit uncertain in the reports. But this is where it gets interesting. The quote-unquote evidence.
Yes, the camera. It was apparently a genuine vintage model, a Umaflex, and the film inside.
That's the really weird part, isn't it? The film stock.
Yeah, it was apparently manufactured in 1956. Production stopped way back in 1970. And this stuff is apparently really hard to develop after so long, very unstable.
But his roll was supposedly in near-perfect condition.
Exactly. That kind of tangible detail, it makes you pause, doesn't it? Even if you're skeptical.
It does. So they managed to develop it.
They did. A photography expert, apparently. And the photos, well, they showed Kyiv, all right? But Kyiv in the 1950s.
Wow.
And there was a photo of Sergei, looking younger, with a woman, presumably Valentina, wearing the exact same clothes he was found in.
On the UFO. Did that show up?
Yep. One photo apparently showed that bell-shaped object he described.
Okay, that's compelling visual stuff, if true. What was Sergei's reaction?
According to the story, he just looked at them and said something like, "See? I told you?" No big explanation for the UFO or how it happened, just that it did when he took the photo.
Almost anticlimactic. Which, in a way, can make it seem more genuine than some elaborate tale.
Or maybe just good storytelling? But then it gets even weirder. His disappearance.
Right, from the psychiatric facility. How did that supposedly happen?
Okay, so the story goes, CCTV footage shows him walking into his room. The room's secure watched door, bars on the window.
Standard procedure, you'd assume.
But there's absolutely no footage, no record of him ever leaving that room. He just vanished.
Gone. Just like that.
Gone. Poof.
Okay, that adds a whole layer of impossibility, doesn't it?
Totally. And the police apparently did look into it. They found a record of a Sergei Ponomarenko reported missing in Kyiv.
Ah, so collaborating his identity at least.
Kind of.
Right.
The report was from 1960, though, not 1958 when he claimed to be from. A slight mismatch, but close.
Interesting little inconsistency. Did they find the fiancée, Valentina?
They did. Found an elderly woman named Valentina Kurish, and she confirmed that, yeah, her fiancé Sergei vanished back in 1958.
Okay, so far so weirdly consistent.
But wait, there's more. She apparently claimed he actually came back briefly, just days after disappearing, said he'd seen the future, talked about amazing things.
He came back, but then left again.
Yep. According to her, he disappeared again in the 1970s, and she never saw him after that.
Wow. Okay, that's quite the twist.
And one final piece. Valentina supposedly received a photo later on, showed an older Sergei with a mustache standing in Kiev, but Kiev in 2050.
2050, with like a futuristic skyline.
Exactly, and a note saying he'd be back soon.
Okay, that last bit, that stretches things quite a bit. A photo from 2050.
It does, and this is where the more ground explanation usually comes in.
A TV show.
Bingo. Our research points heavily towards this whole narrative being a dramatization for a Ukrainian TV show called Aliens. It aired around 2012.
And they had an episode specifically called Time Traveler.
That's the one. It seems highly likely this is the origin of the story as we know it.
Did the show present it as fact?
Apparently not explicitly. Reports say each episode had a disclaimer, saying the theories were speculative, based on witness accounts, no definitive proof. More like docudrama entertainment.
Right. And when you look closely at the evidence from the show itself, things start to unravel.
Exactly. Like that CCTV footage date stamp. It says Wednesday, April 23rd, 2006.
Well, let me guess. April 23rd, 2006 wasn't a Wednesday.
Nope. It was a Sunday. Small detail, but telling.
And the ID card?
Some analyses point out inaccuracies in the seals shown on the card in the program, things that wouldn't be quite right for a genuine Soviet ID of that era.
And that photo from 2050.
Almost certainly Photoshopped. Some people have even pointed out what looks suspiciously like the Empire State Building in the background.
In Kyiv. Yeah, that's not right.
Not quite, no. So the visual evidence seems pretty shaky on close inspection.
And beyond the TV show, what about actual verifiable proof? Police reports? News articles from 2006, anything about Dr. Kutrikov?
That's the biggest issue. Our research couldn't turn up independent, verifiable police records matching the story, or contemporary news reports from 2006 before the show aired. No real trace of Dr. Kutrikov or the photo expert.
So the whole thing seems to exist primarily because of the TV show.
It really looks that way, a compelling story, definitely. It hits all the right notes, mystery, evidence, disappearance, but likely fictional.
Yet it persists. People love this story,
Yeah.
which says a lot about how much we want to believe in time travel, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears. Our next story takes us back further, 1935, and the person involved is, well, pretty credible on paper.
You're talking about Air Marshal Sir Robert Victor Goddard.
That's him, RAF officer. This one's often called the wartime wonder.
And unlike Sergei, this comes directly from Goddard himself, a respected figure.
Right. So the setup is pretty mundane. Goddard's just on a routine flight Scotland down to Andover in England. Nothing unusual.
Okay.
But as he's flying near Grim, he notices an old derelict airbase below. It's rundown, unused.
Got it. Abandoned airfield.
Then suddenly this really bizarre storm kicks up. He described it vividly. Weird brown and yellow clouds, even mentioned violent winds. It got really turbulent. He lost control for a bit.
That sounds intense. Unusual weather description.
Definitely. And as he comes down through this strange storm, breaking out underneath the clouds, the airbase isn't derelict anymore.
What did he see?
It was completely transformed, fully operational, people moving around, planes on the ground.
Different planes.
Yeah, he specifically noted they were unfamiliar yellow aircraft, and the ground crew, the mechanics, they were wearing blue overalls, not the standard RAF brown at the time.
Yellow planes and blue overalls. Very specific detail.
Siri! And then, just as suddenly, he flew back into another cloud, part of that same weird storm system.
And when he came out the other side?
Back to normal. Flying over the same old, abandoned, derelict airbase he'd seen initially, the vision or whatever it was gone.
Wow. Okay, that's a strange experience.
Hey.
Hallucination, maybe? Stress.
Could be. But here's the kicker. The part that makes this story so compelling. Fast forward 4 years to 1939.
Okay. What happened in 39?
Well, with the war gearing up, the RAF renovated and reactivated that old air base near Drem.
Ah, I see where this is going.
And guess what? The training aircraft they started using there were painted yellow.
No way.
Yes. And the standard uniform for RAF mechanics eventually shifted to blue overalls.
Whoa. So the specific, unusual details he saw, they actually came true a few years later.
Exactly. That's why it's such a powerful story. It feels like impossible confirmation.
So Goddard himself believed he'd seen the future.
He did. He referred to it as a time slip, like he'd momentarily skipped forward and glimpsed the airfield as it would be in 1939.
Okay, you can understand why he'd think that. The coincidence is pretty staggering.
It really is. Now, skeptics still point to hallucination or maybe him misremembering details later, or maybe the details weren't quite as precise as the story now claims.
Sure, those are rational explanations. But Goddard was a high-ranking officer, considered reliable, and he apparently became quite interested in paranormal phenomena later in life, suggesting he truly believed his experience.
His credibility definitely adds weight, unlike some anonymous online claimant. It makes you wonder.
It really does. Okay, so from a decorated air marshal to YouTube.
Yeah, quite a jump. Our next case involves someone using the name Dziga Vertov, who popped up in a YouTube interview back in 2014.
Claiming to be from when? The future, obviously.
Way in the future. The 30th century, apparently, around the year 3000.
Okay, and what did this Vertov have to say? Let me guess. Big predictions.
Pretty much. What stood out first was his reluctance. He kept saying he couldn't reveal too much. Something about a time authority frowning on fraternizing with historic citizens.
Time authority.
Right.
Convenient excuse for not providing details.
Kind of sounds like it. His predictions were very broad. Society collapses, money disappears, humanity rebuilds, finds unlimited resources. You know, standard sci-fi tropes.
Nothing specific you could actually verify or bet on.
Not really. And the interviewer seemed pretty skeptical throughout. Then Vertov just left, abruptly, no proof offered.
Pulled a vanishing act. Convenient again.
Yeah. And one thing our research noted, which is kind of funny, for someone supposedly from 1,000 years in the future.
His English was perfectly normal 21st century English.
Exactly. You'd expect language to change, like, a lot over a millennium, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Speech patterns, vocabulary, something.
You absolutely would. That lack of linguistic difference is actually a pretty big red flag.
Agreed. So Dziga Vertov seems highly questionable. More like performance art or a hoax than anything credible. No evidence at all.
Yeah, that one doesn't feel very convincing, does it? Needs more than just a YouTube clip.
Definitely. Okay, let's move to our last main story for today. This one's got a really unique angle. Paul Amadeus Dienach.
Ah, the very long nap story. This one's wild.
It is. So Dienach was a Swiss teacher. In 1921, he falls ill, slips into a coma. A year-long coma.
A full year. That's extremely rare. What was the illness?
Apparently, he was diagnosed with encephalitis lethargica sleeping sickness. It was known to cause these prolonged states of unconsciousness, so there's a medical context.
Okay, so he's in a coma for a year. But the time travel part.
Well, according to his account, written down later, while his body was comatose in 1921, his consciousness woke up.
Woke up where? Or when?
In the year 3906.
Whoa. Okay. How? In whose body?
In the body of a man named Andreas Northam, a physicist living in 1306. Dienach claimed he basically inhabited this guy's body for that year.
So like a consciousness transfer across nearly 2 millennia.
That's the claim. He said he initially experienced Northam's memories, learned about the intervening history, and slowly realized he wasn't in his own time. He was just an observer, in a way, inside Northam.
What did he supposedly see or learn about this future?
A lot, apparently. He described a really turbulent history, centuries of violence, poverty, even nuclear war that devastated the planet. Yeah, but then a long rebuilding phase. A new kind of global government emerges, focused on equality, prosperity. He even mentioned visits from, spiritual beings that brought enlightenment.
Spiritual beings.
And humanity learning to control its own biology, body chemistry, leading to this sort of utopian society where work was minimal. Very grand sweeping stuff.
This sounds like a novel plot, almost. Did he have any personal experiences in this future?
He did mention falling in love with a woman in 3906 who he believed was actually a reincarnation of someone he'd loved in his own time.
Adds a personal touch to the sci-fi epic.
Right. But then, just as suddenly as it started, after about a year of experiencing 3906, he woke up.
Back in 1922.
In his own body.
Back in his own body, in the hospital bed. Yeah. The whole future experience just ended.
That must have been incredibly jarring. Did he tell people?
He was hesitant, understandably. Who would believe him? But he decided to write it all down, everything he remembered, in a diary.
The diary. That's the core of this story, isn't it? It is.
Yeah.
Later, he moved to Greece, became a teacher there. He got sick again and knew he didn't have long. So he gave the diary to a student he trusted, George Papahatsis. Just asked him to maybe practice his German by translating it, didn't say what it contained.
And Papahatzis eventually published it.
Much later, yeah, in 1972. He translated it and published it, and it was controversial, obviously.
I bet. So what's the skeptical take here? Because it's an incredible story.
Well, several things. One, could Papahatzis have just made it up, written it himself, based on Dinah's notes, or maybe just for publicity? It's possible.
Okay. Who knows?
Finding independent proof of Dinah's actual existence has apparently been difficult, and that famous photo, often shown as Dinah, it's been identified as a picture of a completely different person, a criminal from New Zealand, actually.
Oh, that definitely doesn't help the credibility.
Not at all. And then there's the most obvious alternative explanation.
The coma itself.
Yeah.
Given his illness.
Exactly. Could the whole thing have been an incredibly vivid, detailed, year-long dream or hallucination generated by his brain while he was suffering from encephalitis lethargica?
I mean, the brain can do incredibly strange things, especially under medical duress. That seems plausible. More plausible than consciousness transfer, maybe.
It certainly seems like a strong possibility. So, Dinah's story, fascinating, detailed, imaginative. But is it true? Time travel? The evidence just isn't there to confirm it. It remains deeply speculative.
Another case where the story itself is powerful, regardless of the proof.
Definitely. Now, before we wrap up, we should probably quickly mention a few other famous time travel claims that float around, even if they're less detailed or widely debunked.
A good idea. There are quite a few out there. John Titor, maybe?
Yeah, John Titor, the online guy from the early 2000s claiming to be a soldier from 2036. Sent back for an old computer, right? Left blueprints for his machine.
Made a bunch of predictions, too, most of which didn't pan out. Generally considered an internet hoax or maybe an alternate reality game.
Seems likely. Then there was Andrew Carlssin, the supposed stock market whiz from 2256.
Oh, yeah. Arrested for insider trading, claimed time travel was his edge, then vanished after making bail. Classic urban legend.
Turned out to be based on a satirical news story from the Weekly World News, I think. Completely fabricated.
Exactly. Shows how easily those stories catch on. What about older ones? The Versailles timeslip.
The Moberly-Jourdain incident, 1901. Two academics visiting Versailles suddenly felt the atmosphere change, saw people in 18th century dress, even thought they saw Marie Antoinette.
That one's usually explained as maybe shared delusion, or they subconsciously drew on historical knowledge, misinterpreting gardeners as aristocrats, that sort of thing.
Plausible. And the chaplain's time traveler phone clip.
Right, the grainy footage from 1928 seeming to show a woman holding a mobile phone to her ear.
Almost certainly just an early hearing aid device, right? Looks similar if you don't look too closely.
Yep, that's the consensus. Then you have the really wild claims like Project Pegasus.
Andrew Basiago claiming DARPA sent him to Mars and through time back in the 70s.
Zero official confirmation on that one. Purely personal testimony, very much on the fringe.
And the man from Torrid. The guy at Tokyo Airport in '54 with a passport from a country that doesn't exist.
Vanished from a guarded hotel room. Great story, classic mystery, but probably misidentification, a misunderstanding, or just a legend that grew over time. No solid proof.
Like the hipster in the 1941 photo.
Oh yeah, the guy at the bridge opening who looks like he's wearing modern sunglasses and a t-shirt.
Turns out those styles, sunglasses like that, printed shirts, they actually existed back then. Just looks jarringly modern to us now.
Same with that photo from 1943 on a beach. Looks like someone talking on a mobile.
Probably just rolling a cigarette or shielding their eyes, right?
Yeah.
Low res photos, play tricks.
Exactly. And Rudolph Fentz, the guy in 19th century clothes hit by a car in Times Square in 1951, supposedly from 1876.
Total urban legend seems to originate from a sci-fi short story.
And Håkan Nordqvist, the Swede, who claimed he crawled through his kitchen sink pipe and met his older self.
That one was actually admitted to be a marketing stunt, wasn't it? For a pension fund, I think.
Yep. Clever marketing, but not time travel.
And finally, those Dawdleston messages. The computer messages from the past and future received in an old English cottage.
Super weird, very complex story involving messages supposedly from the 16th century and the 22nd. Highly debated, lots of skeptical analysis, but no definitive proof either way. Still argued about.
So quite a collection of stories, ranging from the elaborate and possibly fictional to the potentially explainable to the outright hoaxes.
It really shows this spectrum. But what's striking is how compelling even the debunked ones can be. There's something about the idea of escaping time that just resonates.
Totally. That desire to see other times, maybe fix mistakes, or just know what's coming. It's deeply human, isn't it?
It is. And, while physics does have these theoretical possibilities like wormholes or effects from relativity near black holes or at high speeds.
Closed time-like curves, all that fascinating stuff.
Right. But the energy needed, the practicalities, we're nowhere near building a working time machine. It's still firmly science fiction for us right now.
For now, anyway. But it does leave you with a thought, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, thinking about all this, if you could travel through time, what do you think the biggest impact would be? The most worrying thing? Or the most exciting?
That's a huge question. The potential for paradoxes, changing history, it's mind-boggling.
And where would you even want to go? If you had one trip, it really makes you think about history in the future in a different way.
It absolutely does. What moment would you choose to witness?
That's something for all of us, and for you listening, to ponder, I think.
Definitely food for thought.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive into some of the most convincing time travel stories. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Hopefully it sparks some curiosity. Keep questioning.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed exploring these mysteries with us, please do consider liking, following, subscribing. You know the drill. It really helps us keep making these deep dives into the weird and wonderful.
We appreciate the support.
We'll see you next time on Beyond the Known.